Welcome to the Perspective Knoll, a home to original fantasy stories. Videos are uploaded once a week, feel free to like and subscribe. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 4 Beyond the Painting. This is too weird, I'm going back, said Charles, and he went to the painting, and as he touched it, his finger struck the canvas and nothing happened. What the hell? He tried again, and again, touching every surface that he could. Why can't we go back, Argatha? Charles was enraged. The bridge is charged for only a short time. The more people or creatures that go through, the more power is drained. So, we must wait a while. I'm sorry, she answered, and there was remorse in her words, but it didn't seem to help Charles at all. So how long do we have to wait for? He asked. At least a few days, she answered. So where are we? Shawn asked as he studied the cabin just a few hundred feet or so from where they stood. We are in Lufforain, more specifically the Brunel Forest, and there is the Spencer house. She pointed to the cabin and looked at it as if it was a symbol of something far beyond Shawn's and Charles' comprehension. Charles looked at Shawn with an "oh what the hell" sort of look. If we are going to be here for a while, I guess we may as well enjoy the ride. Let's get busy figuring out what all this has to do with Ed's untimely death. Shawn threw out an idea. I think this Brunel Forest and this cabin will give us some clues. Argatha, can you get us into that cabin? Absolutely, she answered with a radiant smile. Shawn turned to Charles. Let's go. As they moved out of the shed, Charles turns to Argatha. I want a description of everything we see in this forest. We are new to this world, so if you have to explain things to us like we were children, then please do, if it helps us. Do you understand? Argatha nodded her head and didn't bother with a confusing look, but surely it was implied that she was. Where are the people of the forest you were telling us about? I want to talk to them. Argatha looks at Shawn and Charles with an astonished look. You can't be serious. That's impossible. There are far too many species in Brunel to talk with them all. Not even Ed and Chloe have done such a task. Well, Charles, maybe we don't need to talk to everyone, shrugged Shawn. We are here to find some answers to a nice man being killed, or was he a nice man? Time will tell. Charles began rubbing his chin, and with a sigh from Argatha, she leapt off the roof of the shed and began gliding along the tall grass towards the cabin with Charles and Shawn. To Shawn the air smelled different, not at all like when he would be camping. The familiar scent of pine and dirt and perhaps a musky sort of scent from a nearby river or standing water should be present, but here in Lufforain, it seemed sour. It was hard for him to put it into words. The sounds of the forest seemed to be non-existent, except for the trees and bushes swaying lightly in the occasional breeze. He bent down and broke off a blade of the tall grass and studied it as he moved. It was tan in color. He thought at first that it was dead or dying, but there was nothing crunchy about it. In fact, he had a hard time pulling it off in the first place. He eyed the sky, and there were clouds moving slowly above them, and yet no birds. No chirping within the trees that surrounded the clearing from the shack to the cabin, or other animal noises at all. Everything seemed too calm, as if there was nothing else in this part of the forest but themselves, or something was watching them in the silence of the woods. Once at the cabin, Argatha led them up 3 short wooden steps that brought them to a small porch with a round wooden table and 2 chairs ready for use. At the center of the porch was what they assumed was the front door, and the house reassembled an A-frame style house. Charles checked the large windows on either side of the door to peer inside and look to see if anyone was home. It looks empty. Would there be anyone else here? Asked Charles, turning to Argatha, who was floating just above their heads. There shouldn't be. This place was kept a secret to most, and the Spencers only trusted a few of us to the whereabouts of its location, she answered as she was now fixing her hair in the reflection of the window. A few of us. So, there could be someone here? Shawn asked slowly. Let's find out. With a snap of her fingers, the doorknob twisted and the door opened. Charles was the first to enter, and he slowly crossed the threshold and noticed the house was fully decorated in earthly-like items. There was what appeared to be a pair of lazy boy recliners angled up to the neglected fireplace, which was made of red brick. The walls were painted a deep green, and above them was a large chandelier that held a dozen small white candles that were used, but still had some life in them. Behind the chairs was a long table filled with handcrafted figurines of odd creatures that could resemble beings from this world. Sharing the table were pictures of both Ed and Chloe Spencer. Shawn glanced at them and noticed that one of them had indeed a picture of a young Ed sitting on top of a large brown bear. Upon closer inspection, Shawn could make out a grin on the bear, or was it just his mind teasing him? On the other side of the far recliner was a wooden railing that seemed to lead down to a lower floor. There was a hall leading out of the room to the left of the handrail. Charles crept onward and the hall led to a kitchen. There was a sink, but the faucet was an old hand pump style and wasn't covered in a flashy chrome. "It seems quiet enough," said Charles as he opened a nearby cabinet and found it filled with dusty old canned goods. Tuna, vegetables, spam, chili and all sorts of things. When was this place built? Some time ago, back when the Spencers planned on living here the rest of their lives. Argatha was saddened by her own words. They made this place with their own hands and requested that magic was not to be used. So why did they leave? I mean, why go through all this trouble to make a home here in this fantasy land, to only abandon it? Shawn was looking around and he was puzzled. I wouldn't want to leave here, this place is awesome. Was the war with those trolls too much? Charles guessed as he was now leaving the kitchen and heading up the stairs on the back side of the kitchen to see what lay ahead. No. Argatha answered. The trolls of the Hiatus Mountains never had anything bad to say about the Spencers, directly. They were more upset at the wood elves that live in this forest who brought one of your kind to our world to help defeat the trolls themselves. Charles took a moment to respond as Argatha and Shawn were waiting for him to return downstairs. There was no residual hate of any kind towards Ed. To make the trolls want to come looking for him and smash his face in with a bowling ball, he asked as he returned to them. Just a bedroom up there and a bathroom. I've already told you, there was a feast of peace held for the war efforts and the conclusion of their outcome by the King and Queen of the Western Kingdom. Argatha sat down on one of the counters in the kitchen. There is no one that I know of that would want to do that to Ed, that's why I have brought you two here to help solve this riddle. Suddenly there was a muffled groan and it sounded from somewhere in the house. The three looked to one another and listened hard to see if the noise would emit again. Instead, they heard the creaking of a board that seemed to have been pushed upon, as if someone was walking around. Charles moved back toward the archway that separated the kitchen from the room they had entered in. Shawn was close behind and Argatha too, hovered just behind them as they all peered around the corner. They saw nothing and just as Charles was about to take a step into the room, another deep groan filled the house, and it sounded as if it was originating from downstairs. Charles reached for his gun and aimed it at the top of the stairs and leaned up against the far wall and told Shawn to stay put for now. Charles liked the 6-shooters and he really was attached to the old Colt revolver he held in his hands. He pulled back the hammer and readied himself as sweat began to appear on his forehead. The floor creaked again and no doubt from the steps leading downward, but clearly something or someone was now climbing up to meet the three of them. Charles was breathing louder now and trying to keep his heart rate down. Suddenly they could see a massive figure swaying slowly up the stairs and it groaned again, and that's when Charles knew that it wasn't a man at all. No, it was the largest bear he had ever seen. Charles was about to pull the trigger when a shout came from Argatha, and as the shout echoed throughout the house, the bear seemed to notice that it wasn't alone and screamed in fear. This made Charles and Shawn both scream, also in fear, and they were instantly confused. The bear screamed again, a very human-like scream, and it fell backwards and rolled all the way down the stairs and a low thud followed. "It's Harmen," said Argatha as she flew down the stairs to check on the bear. "Jesus Christ," gasped Charles as he lowered his weapon and sunk down to the floor. "I'm gonna have a heart attack in this place." Shawn was also trying to catch his breath and walked up to the stairs edge and looked down at Argatha talking to the giant bear. "If the heart attack won't kill you, something else here will." Shawn watched as the bear rolled over to his feet and looked up at him with almost human-like eyes. Shawn froze, thinking the bear might be pissed off now. Argatha and Harmen made it back up the stairs and Harmen went to Shawn first and began sniffing at his clothes and face and then his hair. He paused and let out a sneeze and then began sniffing at Charles. Again, he sneezed when he was finished inspecting the stranger and sat down and shook his large head. Even sitting down, Harmen was more than 7 feet tall and his brown fur was long and matted. "So, friends of Ed and Chloe, huh?" Harmen asked. Both Shawn and Charles only managed to nod their heads. "Sort of," began Argatha. "This man, Charles, here is the detective who is working on the case." Chloe and the other law members that were present, she told them that she had killed him, but claims she has no memory of doing it. Chloe blames herself because there is no way that anyone else was in the house. "The painting," Harmen whispered. "You know, as impressive as those things are, they are dangerous to your world." He now looked at Charles and Shawn. "I tried telling Ed that he cannot live in both realms at once. That he must choose one or the other. The paintings must be destroyed. That's not fair, Harmen, said Argatha, folding her arms. Without those paintings, the portals, we would have no way of traversing into other realms. Good, Harmen said sharply. These people should not be here at all. But through our realm they can come and go as they please. Upsetting our natural order. I've said it already, but it bears repeating. Those things are dangerous and should be destroyed. Wait a second. Charles had a thought, and once again his detective instincts were taking over. The killer came through the painting, not but a few days ago. Did you not see anyone? Charles asked Harmen, and this snapped a still shocked Shawn back into reality. Nope. Though I have been sleeping nearly a week, so even if someone had come through, well, I wouldn't have noticed anything, Harmen answered. So, you just found out your friend died, a war friend so to speak, and you just accept that? No emotions at all? Charles continued. We bears show emotions differently than the rest of the world. Ed was a great man, and we all knew that because of his age, he would soon part one way or another, Harmen answered, and there was a tone that gave the impression that he was not happy with the news. Charles thought that perhaps that emotion was first going towards fury, and that the bear needed something, or someone to unload all that anger on and perhaps turn to tears later. Time doesn't run the same here, or it actually affects everyone here differently than in your world, Argatha assured them. So, time is different, how so? Asked Shawn. In your world, according to Chloe and Ed, you have 365 days in a year, and on average, people live to be 80 years old. So according to my math, most people live to be 29,200 days old. Argatha figured, and the only thing Charles and Shawn did was shrug. Here in Lufforain, our years are 384 days long, and things just don't age as fast here. Wow, well, that was a lot to absorb, Shawn said while scratching the side of his face. So, is there something in the air? Is that why it has an almost bitterness to it? That's one theory, Argatha answered. So, what's near the cabin here? In other words, how far from the nearest town? Shawn was going to wait and absorb the talking bear and the time difference later, but now he felt he had to ask the important questions as Charles was. That would tell us where to start looking for suspects and asking the locals what they know. The closest beings are the wood elves here in the forest, said Argatha. They live in the trees and bushes not far down the western path. They are hard to find and their homes are easy to step on. So, you need to stay on the path. Step on their homes? How big are these elves? Shawn was at first picturing elves of his height, but now he was afraid to know how small they were. Oh, I'd say they could fit in your pocket, Argatha answered with a smile. Come on, let's hit the trail. Great, now we're looking for the Keebler elves, said Charles as he rolled his eyes. Argatha in the lead, she showed the men out of the house and walked a few feet off the porch where a crossroad greeted them. Harmen was still yawning and groaning and was almost dragging himself to where the others were. Shawn winked at Charles, where's the yellow brick road? As they cautiously followed Argatha into the forest. Charles and Shawn both wondered who is ever going to believe this adventure. If they survive to tell the story. As they walked deeper into the forest, Charles noticed this place was nothing like he had ever seen before. The floor of the forest was layered with a thick grass kinda like moss, not dirt like all the forests he was used to seeing. It is getting thicker and a bit more unsettling as they all walk further into the land of the elves. They started seeing little white stones quarter size making a path. As they continued, Harmen was still making weird sounds, sort of like he was talking to himself. Maybe I'm just dreaming all this, homicide detective goes off the rails solving a crime. It's not like I'd be the first. Charles thought to himself. Finally, they came across the first wood elf home. One of the elves was out in front of the little house and, judging by the long grey beard, looked more like a garden gnome and not at all like a Keebler elf. Harmen stood straight up and motioned us to be quiet, and at the same time Argatha flew very low to the ground. Shawn was very confused. I have been thinking ever since we went through the picture that this was all just a dream. Now I'm thinking I have just eaten a bad sandwich filled with psychedelics. At that moment, the elf spoke to Argatha in a strange foreign sound. She answered him and they chatted away. Charles and Shawn watched and listened to the two with "you got to be kidding me" sort of expressions on their faces. Argatha returned to them and the elf they had noticed went inside his home without a single glance back at them. So, we are allowed to question the elves, but under one condition, she said slowly, and her expression told the others that none of them would like the terms. I'm not eating any magical shrooms, said Shawn at once. I'll second that, Charles added. Magical shrooms? Harken asked while scratching his underarm. No, nothing like that. Argatha was waving her arms and rolling her eyes, and she flew up to a nearby low-hanging branch and then folded her arms. Are you ready to listen? Shawn and Charles both felt like children who were just scolded by their mother. Harken, on the other hand, had still seemed sleepy and acted as if he hadn't heard what she had said. Sorry, Argatha, what's the terms? Asked Charles. Well, me being a fairy, I will not be able to join you in the interrogations. Harken, being a bear, they will not allow in either, so only Charles and Shawn are going to go forward from here. Fair enough, said Charles, who was ready for anything. It was a weird feeling. One moment he'd be filled with such anxiety and the pressure of being overwhelmed by this new world, and then seeming to not think about it, he puts his detective mind back on track and was ready to go. No, not fair, interjected Harken, who walked up to Argatha and stood up and placed his large paws on the trunk of the tree she was sitting in. I'm here to help find out what happened to my friend, so there is nothing they can do to sway me. Just then a small explosion of yellow smoke occurred just above Harken and quickly surrounded him. Within seconds the large bear had collapsed to the ground. The others rushed to his side and the yellow smoke had already dissipated. Holy crap, is he dead? Shawn asked, as he was now expecting for another one of those colorful blasts would come again, and this time, he would be next to die. I don't think so, no, I think he's just sleeping, answered Argatha as she stood in front of his snout, and occasionally her hair, dress, and wings would toss about due to Harken's steady breathing. So, are we next? Charles asked, looking all over the trees in hopes to catch a glimpse of whatever caused the explosion of the sleeping cloud. This place is going to get stranger every minute, I know it. If one more thing happens that I can't explain, then I'll... Charles never finished his comment because there was yet another explosion just above their heads. As before, there was a loud bang and a cloud of smoke, but instead of it being yellow, this time it was purple. Shawn and Charles coughed for a few seconds due to the thickness of the smoke, but it too dissipated. Shawn looked around and instantly knew that something was wrong. He looked at the trees and they appeared to have grown 100 times larger than they were a few seconds ago, and the moss under their feet now turned into a thick, spongy grass almost knee-high. He spun around to ask Argatha a question, but he looked upon the giant face of a bear. Harken too had grown, and then suddenly a very giant-size Argatha landed next to him. What the hell just happened? How come we aren't big like you? Asked Charles, looking around and feeling that his anxiety was about to get the better of him once more. Well, you see, this was the term upon you questioning the wood elves. They wanted you to be their size and that they would only talk to you humans. Argatha started to laugh. You two look kind of cute when you're smaller than myself. What? Charles yelled. So, we shrank, why? Before Argatha could remind him again of why they shrank, the wood elf who had just talked to Argatha was casually strolling towards them. He wore a blue hat that was tall and lumpy, a brown shirt, and blue pants with large black boots upon his feet. He had a great white beard that rested on his large belly. The elf stopped just out of arm's reach of Charles and Shawn and studied them. We don't speak their language. Shawn leaned in close to whisper at Charles. How are we going to interrogate these people? By asking, oh course, these words came out of the elf's mouth and he didn't seem one bit offended. I'll introduce myself, my name is Greg. Please ta meet ya. Likewise, my name is Shawn. Shawn greeted as formal as he could while being beyond surprised at the almost Irish accent. Charles, on the other hand, was locked up and he was not able to process this at all. He simply stared at Greg and nodded with a weak smile. Unfortunately, this was the only sort of greeting he could muster. Well, now that the formalities are out o' tar way, it'd be best that we all get tar move on. Lots o' ground tar cover before we can get tar talking about serious stuff. Come, follow me. Greg turned around and headed for the house that he had come out of. Shawn had to nudge Charles hard to make him start moving. To Charles, his body felt like he was made of lead. Shawn looked back at Argatha, who was sitting on Harken's back while he still slept soundly. As they approached the house, it was odd looking. The frame of it was made of sticks that were fashioned into almost perfectly smooth cylinders. Then it seemed grass and moss were used as siding, and there were windows, small and round, but there didn't seem to be glass or plastic within it. It was merely a hole in the side of the structure. The roof was made up of a large lily pad and was placed in a manner to look like a dome so that the water would not pool up and cause it to collapse. As Charles looked at the strange little house, he wondered if all this was just a dream. He couldn't even wrap his head around this place. How long has it been since we went through the painting? My ability seems so limited here. I have to get back to my world. All this is too much, he thought. At that same moment, Shawn yelled, "Look out!" A giant elf appeared in the doorway. He was twice the size that they were. He said something to Greg in the same strange language as Argatha had spoke to Greg before. "They don't belong here, they must leave at once." Greg had seemed to repeat what the other elf had told him. "No, they need Tar no. It's already been talked about, so shush. Tell him we know of Ed and Chloe Spencer. That we are here to solve Ed's murder," Charles pleaded with Greg to convey the message to the larger elf. "Oh, sorry about that, me new friends," said Greg as he was trying to talk to the giant elf. "Ya see, Grendy Air is our enforcer. He followed me just in case I needed an extra hand out air. It's simply protocol is all." Greg had used air quotes when he said protocol. "He's not a bad lad once you get Tar no em." Grendy eyed Shawn and Charles with a hint of anger and distrust that set Shawn on edge. Who knew what these elves were capable of and what their laws were? For all they knew, humans were considered a lesser species and should be used as slaves and nothing else. "Come on, into Tar House. I got a surprise for ya." Greg turned and was about to walk past Grendy when the giant elf groaned as if in protest. Grendy, you know Tar rules. You're too big Tar ride da slide. It's the side path for ya." Grendy groaned again and it sounded like gibberish, and yet Greg seemed completely understanding of the giant. Grendy turned and kicked a boulder which was less than a pebble if Shawn and Charles were normal size. The giant turned off the path and disappeared into a large bush. "Come on, we mustn't keep waiting." Greg then entered the house and reluctantly Charles and Shawn followed. Once inside, they surveyed the large single room and were puzzled to see that there was nothing in it. Shawn looked up and yet, nothing, just the dome shape of the roof traveling skyward. They saw Greg bent down over something in the middle of the room, and as they approached him, he had just begun to swing open a door that opened into the ground. "Come," he said cheerfully, and they saw Greg lower himself down to a landing by a ladder. Once on the landing there was nothing but darkness except the light that came from the hatch. However, Greg closed it and latched the door behind him, so they were all surrounded by a dark void. Then there was a popping sound and a gold mist filled the area. It twinkled and gave off light like fireflies and illuminated the area well enough to see. "You like that, huh? Light powder, it's simple, trust me," said Greg with a wink and gave Charles a nudge with his elbow. "Now Tar fun part." Greg looked down over the ledge where the latter was and shook his head, then he looked over to the other side and laughed. At first glance neither Shawn or Charles had noticed that L-shaped landing and was wondering what Greg found so humorous. Greg spun around and gave them both a wide grin and then turned back to the black abyss. Greg then leapt in the air and grabbed his legs like someone about to do a cannonball into water and disappeared into the depths below. "Did we just witness a suicide?" asked Shawn. "If not, why would he not take the stairs?" Charles replied, eyeing what seemed to be a perfectly capable ladder. "Trust me, jump." Greg's voice was echoing about them and it seemed as if he was still rapidly getting further away from them. "I ain't gonna jump," said Charles as he stepped back to the wall behind him with the door leading upwards just above his head. He gave out a long sigh and held his stomach as if he might be getting sick. "Nope, this has now reached new heights, literally. I'm resigning from this case, someone else can do this cause I won't." It sort of reminds you of Alice in Wonderland, doesn't it? Shawn was still eyeing the depths below and was also amazed that the light powder had not dissipated at all. "We've gone this far into the rabbit hole, Charles, and what little we have seen, we're still okay. Not a single scratch yet. I say we go for it. You go right ahead and fall to your death like the insane little garden gnome just did. Me, I'm going back." Charles looked over the latch and noticed that Greg had locked it. Charles could see that there was a keyhole in front of the lever to unlock the hatch, but had no means to break the lock. "Well, that settles that." Shawn stepped right up the edge and took a deep breath. "Cannonball," he yelled, and just like Greg had, grabbed his legs as he leapt into the air and left Charles alone on the landing. For a long moment, Charles stood there, staring at the spot where Shawn's body had disappeared over the ledge. He was stunned and that uneasy feeling washed over him. He bent his head down low and inched to the edge. He stared into the black and his hands became clammy. He wasn't afraid of heights, but more what the circumstance was. If he was on a ladder, he wasn't comfortable with it because of all the things that could go wrong that would lead up to a fall. On the other hand, if he stood on the ledge of a building and was able to see the ground, no matter how far, then that would hardly faze him. Yet now, looking into the unknown, he felt like a child about to go on a large roller coaster for the first time. Charles took a few steps and tried to shake his nerves off. He slowed his breathing and focused on a spot just across from the ledge and stepped forward. He wasn't going to cannonball, he was much less of a showboat as Shawn or Greg was. No, he simply took that third step and fell into the open air.